Today we're going to learn Sukkah Daf Nun Bet. It's the Daf for Shabbat. Today's Daf is sponsored by Judy Shapiro for the 8th year side of her mother, Dira Teichman. Svia Bracha Bat Mordechai V'Chaya Tova. I hope my mother's neshama is uplifted by my study of Torah and Daf Yomi. Okay, we're going to start right now from the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Bet. We were asking yesterday. We talked about the Simchat Beit HaShoeva and how they had to build a balcony for the women in order to separate the women and the men. And then we said, Hechi Avid Hachi, how did they do this? Doesn't it say, Hakol B'chtav Yad Miyad Hashem Alai Skill? The temple has to be built exactly the way the plans God had them. You can't make something new that didn't exist before. So how did they do this? So Amar Rav said, Kha Eshkechu V'darshu. They found a pasuk, and they darshaned it. In other words, they had basis for it in the text. What was that? It says in the description in Sefer Zechariah, where it talks about what the future of the time in the future, when what we call Acharit Hayamim, the end of days. It says, V'safta ha'aretz mishpechot levad. They're going to mourn, the people are going to mourn separately in their families. Mishpachat Beit David levad u'neshehem levad. The family of David will mourn on their own, and their wives will be separate from them. So here comes their drasha. Amru v'halot dvarim kal v'chomer. Umar la'atid lavo she'asukim behesped ve'ein yetzer hara sholeh behem. They're busy at a funeral, right? Who's thinking about men and women and all that stuff in the middle of a funeral? That's not what's first on your mind. There's no real yetzer hara there. And we'll see in a minute whose funeral this was and why. Less likely that there would be a yetzer hara there, the evil inclination and this pull to kind of men and women to be together. So all the ve'ein yetzer hara sholeh behem, there is no evil inclination really hanging out there. Amra, or ruling over the people there. Amra Torah, anashim levad, anashim levad. And yet, what did they do? The pasuk tells you they separated. Achshav shasukim b'simcha. So all the more so we're at this big festivity. Of course. Right? Yetzer hara sholeh behem, for sure there's an evil inclination hanging about there. Al acha kama v'kama, all the more reason to say that people, the men and women, should separate from each other. So because we got into this, now we're going to try to figure out, number one, who is this hesped for? And number two, we're going to get into all these issues about the evil inclination, the yetzer hara. Okay, most of our daf is going to, in fact, almost our whole daf is the Gadatot, and most of them revolve around the evil inclination. So first, Hayespeda Maya Vidite. What was this hesped going on in the world to come, in the future time? What funeral are we talking about? So Rabbi Dosa and the rabbis have a debate about this. There's a tradition that there's Mashiach ben Yosef is going to come. Right? There's two Mashiachs. One is from the Davidic dynasty, and one is from Joseph's family. And the first one is going to come from Joseph's family. And then the tradition has it that in the battle of Gog and Magog, which is that big battle that's going to happen before the Mashiach comes, he's going to be killed. And then after that, Mashiach ben David is going to come and rule. So what they were having a eulogy about in this pasuk is when Mashiach ben Yosef is going to die. In other words, when he dies, that's the description. That's what they're describing. And the other is saying it's the funeral of the yetzer hara, of the evil inclination. That's a very strange statement, and the Gemara will question it immediately. I understand why Mashiach ben Yosef, that makes a lot of sense. So the pasuk right before that, two psukim before, starts discussing this thing that's going to happen. And right, they looked at me about someone that was stabbed. And they mourned for him like they mourned for, as if someone who lost their only child would mourn. Okay, so there you have this idea that it must be the person who was killed, must have been someone very unique. Okay, Mashiach ben Yosef. But if you say it was the yetzer hara, Simcha ba'ilei me'abad. What do you mean? You're doing a hesped? Eulogizing the yetzer hara? You should have a party, right? I'm thinking of the Wizard of Oz, right? Ding dong, the witch is dead, right? Everybody come on, big celebration, the witch is dead. So that's what you should be having. Amai bachu. So why are they crying? Why, right? And a hesped, everyone's crying. Why would they be crying? It doesn't make any sense. So, Kedidarish Rabbi Yehuda. They said, well, Rabbi Yehuda had a drasha that explained the following, and that explains this approach. La'atid lavo, in the time to come, mivi'o kadosh baruch hu liyetzer hara v'shochato lahem, v'shochato b'fnei hatzadikim u'b'fnei harashaim. God is going to come, take the Yetzer Hara in public and slaughter it in front of the righteous people and the evil people. Tzadikim nidmeh lahem kahar gavoa. It's going to look to the tzadikim like this giant mountain. U'rishaim nidmeh lahem kechut ha'sa'ara. To the rishaim, the evil inclination, when they see God, right, everyone's going to view it differently. So good. See this today about how different people approach things differently, right? Not everybody is made up of the same stuff. Not everybody views the world in the same way. To the evil people, it's going to look like a teeny little hair, okay? Halalu or a string, right? Like a string of hair. Halalu bochim v'halalu bochim. Everybody's crying. Why? Tzadikim bochim v'omrim, he'ach yacholnu lichbosh hal gavoa kazeh. It's a few different explanations. I'll go with one of them. The tzadikim look and they say, wow, I can't believe I spent my whole life fighting against that giant thing. So the tzadikim, all their lives, they're fighting the evil inclination. And it's like a constant battle. They win the battle, but it doesn't matter. They just look and they say, I can't believe I spent my whole life fighting that thing. And they cry about kind of almost all the time wasted in their life fighting the evil inclination. The Rishaim bochim v'omrim, he'ach lo yacholnu lichbosh et achut ha'sa'ara hazeh. Say, I can't believe all my life I was fighting against that teeny little thing that caused me, right? And not fighting against, I succumbed to it. How could I have succumbed? Right? I got mixed up with my language. The tzaddikim are the ones who fought against it. The Rishaim gave into it. So I gave into that nothing, right? Sometimes you fight for something so much, and then in the end you realize, what was the waste of my time fighting for? That was nothing. So insignificant, right? They realized the evil inclination was nothing. What was I doing all my life, right? Why did I give into it? And God, just like them, is kind of crying along with them and saying, I can't believe this. He's standing there incredulous. Shene'emar, Ko amar Hashem tzvaot. Here's a pasuk that says, God said, Ki yipaleh be'einei she'erit ha'am hazeh. Just like it's wondrous in the eyes of the remnants of the nation, Bayamim ahem, in those days, gam be'enai yipaleh. When they sit there saying, how could I, or how could I have not, I am also with them saying, how could they? How could they have not? Okay, also in staring and wonder. Amar Rabbi Asi, Yetzer Hara. We're now going to talk a lot about the Yetzer Hara. B'tchila domeh lechut shel buchya. First, it's a very thin thread. Ulevasof domeh ka'avotot ha'agala. Later, it's going to be like the thick rope that they tie up the wagons with, right? Where you tie the horses to the wagons. You need very thick rope, otherwise it'll tear. So basically what they're going to say is, a buchya is, Rashi says it's korea kavish, it's a spider's web. Very thin, right? You can cut it with your fingers in a second. So originally, and here there's a bit of a debate about how to understand this, originally, the Yetzer Hara, it starts off very, very small. And as you give into and sin more and more, it becomes thicker and thicker and thicker, and then it becomes much harder to get out of it, right? We know this to be the case. You start doing something wrong, and the more times you do it wrong, it just becomes your human nature, part of second nature to you, and you just do it because it's so thick that you can't really break the Yetzer Hara. Some people explain the exact opposite, which is if you don't give into it, and this connects more with the tzaddikim in the previous section, if you don't give into it, it will grow bigger and bigger and bigger and keep trying to tempt you more and more and more. And dafka, for the people who resist temptation, for them, it's going to become much, much thicker over time, and it becomes much harder to fight against. Tanu Ravanan, Mashiach ben David. Okay, if we were talking about Mashiach ben Yosef, so now we're going to talk about Mashiach ben David, and we'll see why they bring him up in a minute. It's going to connect to the death of Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben David, she'atid lihigalot b'mira b'yameinu, that will be almost any day, he'll be soon revealed. Okay, right? Living in the destruction of the temple, they believed any day the Mashiach was going to come. Omer lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to him, Sha'al mimeni davar ve'etzen lecha, like Aladdin, right? Ask for any wish you want. Okay, I'll give it to you. Shene'emar, how do we know this? Because it says, As-sapra el chok, ani hayom. Okay, they skip a few words. I'll read you the psukim. It's from Tehillim Perek Bet. Hashem amar elai, God said to me, Bini ata, ani hayom yiladeticha, you're my son. I gave birth to you today. Sha'al mimeni ve'etna, goyim nachalatecha. Ask me whatever you want. I'll deliver all your enemies they'll be in your possession. So now let's see, what does he ask? Well, as soon as he sees that Mashiach ben Yosef dies, it gets killed, what does he say? Omer lefanav, he says to God, Ribbono shel olam, eini mevakesh mimcha ela chayim. All I want is to live. Simple. I just want life. That's it, right? That's something simple to ask for. But he said, that's what I want. Amar lo, chayim, ad shelo amarta, kvar yinaber alecha David avicha. Your father David, right? Your ancestor David, because he's from the family of David, already got you life. What a wasted wish, he's saying, basically, right? Your one wish Aladdin gives you, and then you waste it on something you already have. He says, David already prophesied that you were going to get life, Shenemal, as it says in Sefer Tehillim, right, which is attributed to David. Chayim sha'al mimcha natata lo orech yamim olam va'ed. I'm reading the whole pasuk. It doesn't say the whole thing here, but I asked for life and you gave it to him, meaning he asked for life with their darshaning this for the Mashiach, and you gave it to him that he will live forever. So you didn't really need to ask for that. Darash Rabbi Avira v'item Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Avira or Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi darshans, Shiv'a Shemot yesh leYetzer hara. He has 7 different names. And it's almost like you can, you might think you have it in one place, but it's got another name. He goes by another name. He can catch you anywhere else. Maybe that's the idea here. But in any case, we're going to show all different names that are reflective of avodas of Yetzer hara. Hakadosh Baruch Hu kra'o ra. God called it evil. Shenemal ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra mine'urav. Famous verse at the end of Sefer of Parshat Breshit. Right? God realizes he gets sad that he created the world. He realizes that the human nature is bad, is evil from its youth. Right? Moshe kra'o arel. He called it arel, which is uncircumcised. Shenemar umaltemet orlat levavchem. I will circumcise, I will cut off the orla of your hearts, right? This is the uncircumcised part of your hearts. That's considered, right, your evil inclination. David called it impurity, okay, or impure, even though he didn't really, we'll see in a minute. Shneimar, lev tahor barali Elohim. God built for me a pure heart. Once you say a pure heart, that seems to imply, Michlal, from here you can infer, that there's an impure heart. What's an impure heart? One that's turned by the evil inclination. Very interesting. We're specifically talking about David, who in the end did go after his evil inclination, and we'll get back to that later in today's stuff. Shlomo kra'o soneh. Shlomo called it his, someone who hates you, your enemy. Shenemal im ra'ev sonacha. If your enemy is hungry, ha'achilehu lechem. Okay, now your enemy is not your enemy. It means your own enemy. You are your own enemy, right? Your evil inclination, if you're fighting against it, feed it bread, which they understand to mean go learn Torah. Okay, we'll see this more inside later. And if it's thirsty, give it water, which is also an analogy to metaphor for Torah. Because you're going to put coals on its head, and that will burn it off. And God will repay you. Don't read it as he'll pay you back. Read it as he will make peace with it. In other words, God will help you make peace with your evil inclination if you go do the following. What do you see from there? The evil inclination is called your enemy. Yeshayahu kra'o michshol. He called it a stumbling block. Shene'emar solu panu derech. This is from the Haftarah we read on Yom Kippur, coming up soon. Harimu michshol miderech hamid. Pick up and go make a path for yourself. Pick up the stumbling blocks that are in your way from the way of my people. Yechezkel kra'o even. He called it a stone. So I would say, in another word, really this seems to mean indifference. Okay, that could be the Yetzer hara. Shene'emar basirot yatlev ha'even mibsarchem. I'm going to take away your heart of stone, just like someone who's indifferent to anything. And I'll give you a heart with flesh, the real heart. Yoel kra'ot tzvoni. He called it the northern one, the one from the north. Shene'emar ve'et hatzvoni archik me'alechem. The one from the north, I will distance from you. The north was considered where bad came from. Tanu Rabanan. Now we're going to have a braita about this pasuk about the tzfoni. Okay, it's a pasuk from Zechariah also. This is the Yetzer Hara, the tzfoni. Why is tzfoni Yetzer Hara? Shetzafun ba'omeh b'libo shel adam. It's hidden inside the heart of all people. Everybody has an evil inclination hidden in their hearts, right? It's hidden, so therefore tzafun and tzafon go together. This is the continuation of that pasuk. So God is saying, I'm going to get rid of the evil inclination. I'm going to put it to a place where it's totally desolate. It'll have no people to tempt anymore. Now, the second part of that verse is going to describe all the things the evil inclination did that were so bad. At Panav Alayam Kadmoni, his face was turned to the original sea, which means he put his eyes toward the Beit HaMikdash. What's the first thing? The first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, and he destroyed it. And he killed all the Torah scholars that were in it. After that, what was the end? Well, he went to the Yam HaCharon, to the second temple. He looked toward the second temple and he destroyed it. And he killed the Talmidei Chachamim there. Continuation of that verse, his foulness and his bad odor started, rising up. His foul odor started getting into us. He started messing all of us up by tempting us with the evil inclination. Sonehem shel Yisrael is the enemies of the Jews, but what it really means is the Jews themselves. So he left all the other nations and came to focus his attention on us. Because he did a terrible thing, meaning, in other words, the evil inclination caused us all to sin, and therefore, remember the beginning of the verse, God is going to destroy it. Soon we'll get to this showdown, right? We talked about earlier in the thing about when in the time to come, God is going to slaughter it in front of everyone. That's also described in this verse. The Yetzer Hara is strongest, surprisingly, in the Talmidei Chachamim themselves. And now Abaye is going to we're going to hear a story about Abaye, where we see how strong a Yetzer Hara he had as compared to other people. He heard a particular man speaking to a particular woman, and he said to her, let's go on a walk together. Abaye says to himself, I'm going to go follow them so that when they come time and they want to sin together, I'll stop them, because for sure that's going to happen. He followed them for 3 parsaot. That's always, we had this number a bunch of times. That's right. It's a typical number of, sizable distance, and in a lake, or a swamp, when they went to separate from each other, once they were finished with their walk, and each one goes to go their merry way. Sham'inu deka'amre, he hears him say, Orchen rechika, the road is long, vitzavtim besima, and it's been nice to walk with you, right? This was a nice, pleasant walk. End of story. Nothing happened with them. Amar Abaye, iman desane lihava, if it was someone who hated me who was here, which is his way of saying, if it were me instead of him, lo havamatelu kume nafshe, I would not have been able to hold myself back. I would have been too tempted. Azal talanafshe bi'ibura didashu mitzter. He went and hung himself by the door. He didn't literally hang himself. He kind of hung his body next to the door. And he just came home and put his head down and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe." Right? It's first of all, there's a few things about the story, but we'll get there in 1 minute. So basically, let's actually talk about it before we finish the story. He realizes, right, and he's learned a few lessons here. Number one, what he learns is that he seems to have a strong evil inclination, which is depressing him terribly, because he feels like, why, I learned Torah, I do all these things. Why do I have such a terrible evil inclination? This was Abaye, who's one of the most, quoted scholars in the Gemara. And number two, he misjudged people, right? And as he thought, and this is something we talked before about, you can't look at someone and assume you know what they're thinking. For everybody, things are different. Temptation is different for different people. What people think is how people act is different. You can't look at someone and say, oh, if they, right, don't look at people through your eyes. You don't experience things in the way other people experience them. And that's a hard lesson that Abaye has to learn right after he followed this man, assuming he knew exactly what was going to happen, and he was totally wrong. So now, how does he get better? Well, Ata Usaba, an older man comes along, older, always, wiser, and he says to him, Tanele, don't worry, there's a brighter that says, Kol gadol mechavero yitzro gadol himenu. The greater person you are, the stronger your inclination is. So this is just a sign that you're a very special person, and because of that, you have a stronger evil inclination. Maybe this could explain why politicians and people who have power seem to have a lot of, often, not always, but often have a stronger evil inclination than maybe the rest of us, or at least get caught up in a lot of mess. Again, whether it means gadol in Torah or gadol, power, how power corrupts, it could mean. But I think he meant it in a very positive way, that here it seems to be saying also earlier in the story that the Yetzer Hara for tzaddikim is much stronger than for other people, which again gives them more reward because they've had to fight harder. So in the end, they get rewarded more for it. Every day your Yetzer Hara is after you. How do we know this? Shene'emar, rak kol hayom. Right? It talks about the Yetzer Hara. It says it's just bad all day. Okay, this is in the same verse before in Breshit. Right? Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'at adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom. Right? We quoted a pasuk before. It was wasn't exactly that one. It was similar, was it? Ki rabba ra'at adam. I don't know why. I'm not finding it now. But anyway, right, that's also at the end of Sefer Breshit. It's just bad. And, right, we said, Ki yetzer adam rami ne'urav. Right, is that the pasuk? 1 second. Just want to check that I didn't misquote where that pasuk was from. Yetzer hara. Ki yetzer lev adam rami ne'urav. Oh, yeah, was that? 1 second. I was wrong. It's not the end of Parshat Breshit. This is actually later. This is Vayar Hashem Ereach Nichach Vayom Hashem Libo Lo Sifa Kalel Oret Anama Bavor Adam Ki Yetzer Lev Adam Ra Minurav Sifa Lakot Kol Chai Kasher Asiti. Right, that was different. That was already in Breshit Het, so I was wrong about the first quote. Okay, that was in chapter 8 of Breshit. Okay, next. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Yitzro Shel Adam Mitgaber Alav Bechol Yom Umevakesh Lahamito. The Yetzer of a person not only works against him every day, but it wants to actually kill him. How do we know this? Shene'emar, it says in Tehillim, Sofer Rasha leTzadik umevakesh lahamito. The Rasha is looking to the Tzadik and wants to kill him. Okay, so there you see that's the evil inclination. And if it weren't for God's help, he never would be able to get over the evil inclination. Shene'emar, it says there also in that same chapter, Hashem lo ya'azvenu biyado v'lo yarshi'enu b'hishafto. God will not leave you in his hands. It's actually the next verse. Okay, it was Tehillim Lamed Zayin, Pasuk Lamed Bet, and then Lamed Gimel. God will not leave you in his hands, and lo yarshi'enu b'hishafto. He won't make you come out the bad guy when you get judged. So in the end, God is the one who gives us the help that we need to be able to get over our evil inclination. Tana Dibei Rabbi Yishmael. So you might say, how does God do it? Maybe this is one answer. It's not exactly that God does it directly, but God gives us ways in which to get over it. So in a Braita from the house of Rabbi Yishmael, it says, "Im paga b'cha menuval zeh," if this despicable thing got to you, which is the evil inclination, mishacheu lebeit midrash, pull him into the Beit Midrash. The solution is learn Torah. Like God gave us Torah as an antidote to the Yetzer Hara. Im even hu nimoach, if it's a rock, it'll melt or fall apart. Im barzel hu mitpotzetz, if it's iron, it will split up into a million pieces. Im even hu nimoach, if it's rock, it will dissolve. How do we know this? It says anyone who's thirsty should go to the water. The water is a reference to Torah. So if you're thirsty, go learn Torah. How do rocks get worn out? From water. Only water can wear out the rocks. So therefore, if the Yetzer Hara is like a stone, Water is the remedy, and water is Torah. Im barzel hu mitpotzets, dichtiv halokod dvarai ke'esh num Hashem, uchepatish yipotzetz sela. The words of God are like a fire. The words, the speech of this is what God said. Uchepatish yipotzetz sela, and it will explode like a hammer on a rock. Okay, so here you have this image that, again, the words of God, the words of Torah that he gave us is the antidote. It could cause even a hammer to smash into pieces. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani amar Rabbi Yonatan, Yetzer hara mesito la'odam ba'olam hazeh u'me'ir alav la'olam haba. It seduces you in this world, and it will testify against you in the next world. Shneimar, mifanek minoar avdo. If you spoil from your youth the servant is supposed to serve you, but if instead you spoil the servant, meaning the Yetzer hara, the evil inclination, acharito yeh manon, your end will be manon. What is manon? Shekem ba'atbach shel Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia had a code language called atbach, which I'll talk about in a minute. Kor'im l'sahada manon. If you use his code language, you change the word manon into the word sahada. Sahada is edut, is testimony. So in the end, he will testify for you, meaning he'll testify against you in the court above when you get to heavens. So how do we get from manon to sada? What is this atbach? Okay, the more famous is atbash. Atbash is aleph goes with taf, bet with shin. We take the first letter, we switch it with the last letter of the alphabet. The second letter, we switch it with the second to last letter, and so on. This is a bit of a different one. It was Rabbi Chia's code language. Atbach, if you notice the letters, aleph and tet add up to 10. Aleph is 1, tet is 9. Bet and chet also add up to 10. So in this language, you switch every letter with another letter that together with it equals 10 or 100. But you end up with one problem, which is, what about hey and nun? Hey is 5, nun is 50. Neither of those have another matching letter that can add up to either 10 or 100. Also, I think you can do it to 1,000 or something. I forget how that exactly works with the higher numbers. But in any case, what you see here is that, so hey and nun don't have a match, so they go with each other. So let's look at the words. The letters. Mem switches with samach. Mem is 40, samach is 60. Nun is 50, so it switches with the hey, which is 5. Vav switches with Dalid, because both 6 and 4 add up to 10. And you end up, instead of manon, you get sahada, because the nun switches with a hey. Rav Huna Rami. Rav Huna brings a contradiction between two psukim. Again, talking about bad, inclinations, things that will sway you from the path. Ki ruach znunim hit'ah. It will trick you, cause you to swerve to the side. Uchtiv bikirbam. In another verse, these are two verses. I think they're from Zechariah. Let me they're from Hosea. From Hosea, it says there, in one pasuk, it says, it's a ruach znunim made them turn aside. Another one says it was within them. Now, if something makes you turn aside, it's something from without, not within. So how could that be? Originally, it swayed them, and then eventually it got inside of them. In other words, again, this is what happens with the evil inclination. Amarava. Along these same lines, bitchila in the beginning, it's like somebody walking, which is like a stranger. You're walking, there's someone else walking. Then he becomes your guest, right? You let him in, but as your guest. And then he becomes a person, which really means like he's a ben bayit here. He belongs here. This is his house, rather than him being a guest. So where do we get this from? Shneimar, going back to, we talked about David and his evil inclination, where there he didn't really seem to have one, but we know from the Bathsheba story he did. And now we're going to quote this story that Natan HaNavi gives him a mashal, a parable about a rich man who decides to take he goes to this poor man who has one sheep and he wants to take his lone sheep. So here's the story. It says, Vayavo helech li'ish hashir. This wanderer came to this rich man. So first he's just called a wanderer. Vayachmo lakachat mitzono midkaro la'asot le'oreach. And then he wanted to take from the tzon and the bakal to make him his guest. And then he took the kivsa of this, right, the sheep of this poor person. And then he made it for the person who came to him. In other words, This is describing the evil inclination. First, it was just alongside him. Then he brought it to be his guest. And then he became an ish. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ever katan yesh lo la'adam. Okay, a man, we're talking specifically about a man, has one limb in his body. That's tricky one. We know which one they're talking about. Mar'ivo saveh must be ra'ev. We have something that seems a little opposite from what it is, which is if you starve it, you will be satiated. And if you satiate it, you'll be hungry. So different ways this is explained. First of all, they learn it from this pasuk shene'emar ki mar'itam vayispa'u. So it's a little tricky how to learn it from this verse. Some people say ki mar'itam when you do bad yispa'u, okay, or when you're ra'ev yispa'u, like maritam from the lashon of ra'ev, like you starve it, you'll be satisfied. Some people say ki maritam. By the way, the pshat there means when the animals are grazing, kimaritam vayispau, and then they will get full. It's really the rest of that pasuk, which is likely the proof. When they get satiated, then they get arrogant and they forget God, and that brings them down. So it could be that what they're saying is, right, satiating something actually is bad and causes bad things to happen. So now let's talk about the two ways to understand this. Either it means, right, you give someone a finger, they want a hand, right? So the more if you don't give anything, right, you starve it. Now, it doesn't mean starve entirely. It just means that you don't engage in sexual relations all the time. Then you'll actually be satiated. But the more you engage in it, the more you're going to want. That's one way of seeing it. Another way I saw, which is a little bit, not exactly the pshat, I'm trying to remember if it was Rashi who says this way. Yeah. Rashi says, must be obetashmish, if you have sexual relations too much, ra'ev, gufo chaser koch v'ra'ev la'et zikna. When you get old, you'll be hungry. You won't have any strength left. You'll use up your strength by engaging in sexual relations all the time, and you'll be exhausted. Whereas if you don't do that all the time, you'll save your energy and you'll have more energy later in life. Okay, so those are some different explanations. Amarav, and it's obvious why they bring this up here, because it all has to do with the Yetzer Hara and the temptation. Amar Rav Chana bar Acha, Amrei Berav, he says from the house of Rav, there's four things God created that he was sorry he created them. Ve'eluhein, these are them, Galut, exile, Kasdim, the people from the Babylonians who exiled the Jews, Yishmaelim, which are usually the wanderers, like the people who live in tents. We're going to talk about them in a minute. Ve'yetzer hara, and the evil inclination. Galut dichtiv atam. So now we're going to have to bring a verse that shows that God felt bad, that he regretted having done this. Dichtiv atam maliponu u'mashem kilukacha michinam. God says, and what am I doing here now? Why did I do this? That my people were taken for no good reason, and I can't believe I let them go into exile. Okay, that's a verse from, it is from Yeshayahu. Kasdim dichtiv, hen eretz kasdim zeh ha'am lo haya. Would have been better had they never existed. Yishmaelim dichtiv, yishlayu ohalim l'shodedim. Those who sit, this is Eov, and this is talking about how life is good for the evil people. Okay, the people, the shodedim, the robbers, they sit comfortably in their tents. This is why we're talking about the Ishmaelim, who are usually merchants who are in tents, like Bedouin-like. Ubatuchot l'margizei el. There's batuchot, that means they're very confident, those people who get God angry. These are the people, right? It's good for them. They have a good life. La'asher heviya lo habiyado. These are the ones that God brought with his own hand. In other words, and God is angry with himself, almost to say, I can't believe I did this with my own hands, and I gave these good things to these evil people. Yetzer hara dichtiv asher hareoti. When it comes to Yetzer hara, God said, and I brought this bad upon you. So he feels bad that I brought the bad upon the Jewish people. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ilmalei. Now, in light of this last pasuk, he's going to say something about that last pasuk. Were it not for shalosh mekaot halalu, these following three psukim, nitmotetu ragleihem shel soneihen shel Yisrael, the legs of the people, the Jewish people, would have been destroyed. In other words, we never would have made it were it not for the three psukim. God said, I'm the one who caused the evil, and therefore God feels responsible, and therefore he helped us to get out of it. Another one, it says, so we have also in Yom Kippur coming up, on Kol Nidre night, we say, Hine kechomer b'yadei yotzer, we're like the material in the hands of the potter, right? That God could do with us whatever he wants. In other words, God can craft us. So we're part of, because of God, we're still here because he's the one who crafts us. He's the one who does things. And which means also he can craft things to be better for us, save us. V'idach, and the third is, Vasiroti at leva even mibsarchem v'natati lachem lev basar. Right? God promises he's going to take out our hearts of stone and turn them into real hearts. And again, God has the power to shift things. Number one, he feels responsible. Number two, right, we're just like material in God's hands. And number three, he has the power to change also, right, to turn our hearts into proper hearts and turn us around. Rav Papa Amar, Af Mehainami, you can also learn it from here. I'm going to put my spirit into you. So again, God has the power to give us life. Okay. It doesn't mean that we're exempt from making sure that it's going to happen, right? We have to do our part, but God also helps us. Okay, now we're going to learn some psukim in Zechariah. First, Rav Sheshet is going to misunderstand the verses. I'll read the verses so you understand already from the beginning how they're supposed to be read. So Zechariah Perek Bet starts off. He sees this image. Zechariah saw a lot of images. Hine arba kranot. He sees 4 horns. I said to the angel who was speaking to me, Ma ele, what are these? These are the horns that scattered Judah and Jerusalem and the Jewish people. And then God showed me 4 craftsmen. And I said, what are those? What are they coming to do? He said to me, these are the horns that scattered the Jews. And these are going to come. These are going to fight against those horns of the Gentiles that are coming to kick them, move them away. So the craftsmen are coming to resolve the problem of these 4 horns. But it's a little tricky because when he asks, what are the craftsmen, the answer he gets is these are the 4 horns that scatter the people. So first, Rosh Hashanah is going to think that the craftsmen are also the horns, and he's going to get a little confused. So first, we're going to see who are these 4 craftsmen. Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida, Mashiach ben David, or Mashiach ben Yosef. And this is probably why we're mentioning it, because we referenced them before. Ve'Eliyahu, Kohen Tzedek. Kohen Tzedek is either Malki Tzedek, who was a Kohen Le'el Elyon with the war with the kings in the time of Abraham, or possibly it's talking about some Kohen that's going to be in the future. Mativ Rav Sheshet. Wait, you're saying they're these 4 amazing people. If that's the case, these aren't the things that scattered the people. These are the things that return the people. And the pasuk says they scattered the people. So Rav Chana says to him, go look at the end of the verse. Learn from there. No, they're coming to go against the horns. He says, Rav Sheshet says, when I'm up with you, Rav Chana, when it comes to Agadata, I have nowhere to go. You clearly know much more than me, right? I should listen to you more. So we talked about the 4 craftsmen, these 4 amazing people. Now we're going to talk about a verse that talks about the 7 shepherds and the 8 princes that are going to come and save the people and bring peace. Who are these? David be'emtza, Adam shetu metushelach mimino, Avraham, Yaakov, Moshe b'smalo. Why specifically these people? Some of them say that these people all were called shepherds. So because of that, they're the ro'im. Umaninu shmona nesichei Adam, who are the nesichim, Yishai v'Shaul u'Shmuel, Amos u'Tzvanya, Tzidkiah, u'Mashiach ve'Eliyahu. Okay, those are the 8 that are there. There's questions why these 8. Rashi actually says he doesn't know why these 8 were chosen, so I'll leave it as a question. Okay, finishing up now, we want to go back to our Mishnah. We finished with these agadatas that we got off on about the separation of the men and women in the Yetzer Hara. From now, we're going to go back to what happened at the Tekes Simcha Ber Shoeva. So Arba'as Sulamot were these 4 ladders. Tana Gov Hashal Menorah Chamishim Amah was 50 amot high. Right? These were very tall ladders that went all the way up to the top. you can see, I'll show you some pictures, although I have a little bit of an issue with this picture. But this picture in the book I was using the other day shows these very tall things with menorot, lights at the top, torches. And there's ladders, these very tall ladders leading up to the top. And we said the children would climb up those ladders. Seems like there's separate menorot, and each one has its own ladder, which is a little hard to understand with the pshat of the Mishnah. But in Safrai's book, he has a picture. It's hard to see here, but from an Egyptian picture where you have different ladders going up to the same pole. And he claims that it was very likely there, if you see in the other picture, there were 4 lights on each pole. So it could be the children each had a ladder leading up to each one of the lamps that were in the poles, and that's what happened here with the children climbing up. So let's read on. That 120 log in their that they were carrying in their pitchers. So they asked the following question. Each one at 120, and by the way, 120 is about 50 liters. That's a lot of oil to be carrying. Or did each, right, was it all together me'asrim log, and each one only had 30, or did each one have 120 log? Tashma, let's learn from the following Tannaitic source. They each had 30 in each. So there it becomes clear they only carried 30 each. Shehem kulam me'asrim log, right? Imagine them climbing up that very, very, very tall ladder with tons of stuff on their backs, right? So it must be they only had 30. Tana, another brighter. She was a wealthy woman who had sons who were Kohanim, and her son was very strong and amazing, apparently. Shayano, they told about him. Remember that the Kohanim had to carry the parts of the body up the ramp to get to the altar to burn them. He would be notel shtei yerechot shel shor hagadol shel hakoach be'elef zuz. Again, we have this 1,000 zuz, like the lulav of Rabban Gamliel. He brought this gigantic shore that was worth 1,000 zuz. It must have been huge, and he carried the 2 thighs up the ramp himself. And he walked very slowly with his toe to heel. Right? Normally, if you were carrying something super heavy, you want to quickly get it off your back. He, no problem, he carried it very slowly. But his brothers, the Kohanim, wouldn't let him do this. They wanted as many people as possible to be involved, so they wouldn't let him carry this all by himself. And these guys were stronger than him. So my meshubachim, how were they stronger? If you want to say they were stronger, they were carrying heavier things. Hani yikiratve. The thighs of the calves of the bull was much bigger than what they were carrying. Ela hatam kevesh muruba velo zakif. That was a ramp. That was a big, wide, square or rectangular ramp where there was a lot of space, and it was very easy, right? You went up a little, right? It only had a very small incline. Wasn't very steep. Sulamot uzakif tuba. But this was ladders, and it was very steep. Much harder, even if you're carrying less, to walk up that ladder is much more impressive than the guy who carried the animal up the ramp, okay? Because that was a much easier walk than climbing up this ladder. With that, we'll finish for today. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov, everyone.